Hello, welcome to Call for Justice's training program with United Way 211 at the Ceridian Corporation in Bloomington, Minnesota. My name is Krug. I am the Executive Director of Call for Justice. Today, we're going to be training on veteran legal resources and as well as their community resources. We have two very super speakers who will inform you and also, I think, entertain you a bit. So our first speaker is Sara Sommarstrom, who is the Vet Law Director for the Minnesota Assistant Council for Veterans. Our second speaker is Maria Wetherall, Director of the Ramsey County Veterans Services. Is there anything either of you would like to add for your biographies?
I think that pretty much sums it up. The relevant things.
Maria?
I've been working for Ramsey County since 2009, and it is a great job, great privilege, and a great challenge.
And you're also a Navy veteran, is that correct?
I am a Navy veteran. That is one of the requirements for the job.
Okay. All right. Well, I will leave it up to our speakers, and here we go.
Great. Well, as she introduced, I'm the Vet Law Director for the Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans. How many of you have heard of MACV before? Oh, wonderful. Well, that should make the first 10 slides go very quickly. I actually was working for a group called the Minnesota Justice Foundation, which coordinates all of these statewide law student pro bono projects. When I was approached by MACV asking if I could help them for family law issues with their veteran clients. MACV runs transitional and permanent housing options, does employment assistance, but they were struggling with clients that had issues primarily in child support. So they could get the veterans stabilized, they could get them into temporary housing, get them off the streets, but a case manager couldn't really do much about their child support problems. So they could get them stabilized, get them some income, and then they'd see that go back out the door for child support payments that were not calculated based on the person's ability to pay. So we started doing legal clinics for homeless veterans in 2009. We did 1 in 2009, we did 6 in 2010, and then I begged them and was successful in getting them to hire me in 2011. So last year we did 26 clinics around the state and Fargo, which is not in the state, but very close. And we served about 1,200 veterans on all types of legal issues. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about MACV's program, a little bit about the legal program, the common issues we see, and the best referrals for you to make. I'll give it away right now. Just send them to me. I will give you my phone number. I'm sort of a triage specialist, so I kind of do what you guys do just for veterans legal issues. We're going to talk a little bit about who our veterans are, how you identify veterans who are calling, the best practices in terms of finding out that information, and then Maria's going to cover some of the programs through the County Veteran Services programs. Please do ask questions as we're going. Veteran status can be very confusing. The easiest way to find out if someone is a veteran is to ask if they serve their country. The term veteran has a lot of baggage. There are a lot of veterans who don't think they're veterans because they didn't serve in combat. Veterans who may not think they qualify for the services because they weren't injured in combat. The most common definition of a veteran that's used in the state definition in Minnesota is anyone who served 181 days of active duty or 1 day of combat. There are other definitions, but that's the main one. Also, not having a dishonorable discharge. Somebody who is dishonorably discharged is not considered a veteran for any purpose, I think. Right, Maria? Largely.
We serve them in my office. We actually do serve people who are dishonorably discharged.
Yes.
But largely, they are not eligible for the standard benefits provided by the state and federal government.
But one of the sort of the themes of our conversation today is going to be over-refer people you think might be veterans or veteran family members to veteran services, because we can really dig into the situation and figure out if they are somebody who these programs could help.
Sarah, even with a vet who may be dishonorably discharged, do you want referrals of that person as well so that you may be able to offer some suggestions to that person?
Definitely. I'm actually working on a discharge upgrade project right now with some pro bono partners. So while I'm not technically allowed to work with dishonorably discharged veterans in my day job, no one's stopping me from creating a program to turn them into honorably discharged veterans so I can work with them. So even though I can't work with them as my client, we can certainly connect them to the resources, to an office like Maria's or someone else who does have resources to help them. So who are our veterans? There are about 22 million veterans in the United States currently. The pie chart under Gulf War, that includes the current conflicts, the Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation New Dawn, which is Iraq and Afghanistan basically. 10% female veteran population. Right now we have an active duty female fighting force of about 16%. of the military service members. So we're going to see a huge increase in female veterans, and that's one of the subgroups that identifies less as a veteran and accesses the services through the VA a little bit less. Less than 40% of eligible veterans are enrolled in VA services. That's 60% of people not taking free healthcare, right? All of the veteran statistics we're going to show you today are from the VA, which means they are only people they know about. You would think perhaps that an email would go to the VA from each of the branches of service saying, here are the people who are now veterans. That doesn't happen. People have to go to the VA, sign up for services, and that's how they're identified as a veteran in the VA system. So our numbers are severe undercounting, both on a national and a state level. I think this is interesting because I think it really shows some of the difficulties we have in Minnesota in identifying our veteran population. As you can see, this is by county, OIF, OEF population. So we have a pretty significant military population. We have a lot of people in Minnesota who serve. We have a very strong military and service culture here, but we don't have any military bases. So many of the people you're going to see are perhaps members of the National Guard or Reserves. Those individuals are also eligible for veteran services if they meet the other guidelines. So if they're in the National Guard and they do active duty combat, they are a veteran with a positive discharge. If they do over 181 days of active duty service, not including training, correct, Maria?
Correct.
Yep, they would still qualify for veteran services. So some people think that if you weren't in the Marines or the Army or the Navy or the Coast Guard or the Air Force, you're not a veteran. That is not true. The Reserves and National Guard members are also eligible for veteran services. One of the struggles that we have here in Minnesota is that part of military culture is protecting your own, being part of a team, being part of a unit. If somebody served outside of the National Guard or Reserves, their unit is not in Minnesota, right? So their commanding officer, their support team, their battle buddy is not here to keep an eye out for them. One of the other struggles we have is that many veterans, and this is a vast generalization, but many veterans struggle to ask for help in a timely manner where we can actually do something to help resolve the problem they have. And so when we don't have the support network of their unit, we don't have their commanding officer knowing what's going on with them, knowing that they missed work, knowing that they've been having problems with self-medication, it's harder for us to identify them. So one of the reasons I'm really happy to be here today is that the more people know to look for these issues, the more likely it is that we are going to be able to connect to these veterans in a way that's going to help us stabilize them. I work with homeless veterans. So a lot of the statistics I'm going to show are related to poverty, homelessness, but certainly non-homeless veterans are more than welcome to call me. I can give them brief advice over the phone. We can help them at our legal clinics. We use our clinics really as an outreach tool to identify veterans in the community. A lot of veterans will come to talk to a free lawyer. I kind of say we're shiny carrots in the middle of the room, and then we sneakily send them over to the social worker who will actually solve their problems, right? So we're happy for over referrals for the legal clinic. Because if we can identify them, we can connect them to the network through the VA, through the county veteran service offices to be able to provide them with that support. So as I said, we have a very small active duty presence in Minnesota. Most of these people not in this category right here are recruiters. So there's not a huge presence of the branches in Minnesota. In Minnesota, we have about a little bit less than 400,000 veterans. Best estimate right now is about 10% of those individuals, 10%? 10% of those individuals will experience homelessness in a year, or their family. We have an older veteran population. One of the reasons for that is our current fighting force is smaller, right? We're seeing people do multiple tours now when that wasn't something that happened as often in, say, the Vietnam era. Most people who served in Vietnam did one tour, right? It was a difficult tour. They did one, maybe two. I saw jaws drop when I was at a dinner in San Diego and somebody mentioned they'd done 4 tours in Vietnam and everyone around the table was like, you did what? What? But how many of you know someone who's done 4 tours in the current conflict? 6 tours, 7 tours, right? I mean, that's something we don't even bat an eyelash at anymore. And a lot of these folks are just starting to come home now. And so we need to make sure that we're vigilant about getting the word out there about the services that are available to them so that if they do struggle with reintegration, we can insert ourselves before it becomes a problem of homelessness. I think everyone who works in social services in any way, shape, or form understands it is far cheaper and easier to prevent homelessness than it is to solve it once it's happened. It's easier for us to pay rent for someone than to find them new housing after an eviction, right? So we're trying to be preventative about how we work with our veterans. Across the board in terms of service period, we have a good number of Gulf War veterans, Vietnam veterans. Sadly, our World War II veteran population is aging right now. We still see them at the legal clinics. I've got a pair of identical twin brothers, obviously, who come to the legal clinics, and one is the nice one and one is the enforcer, and it's just awesome. They want their driver's licenses back. I don't think any of us really want them to have their driver's licenses back.
They've called me.
I parked straight. I'm like, on the sidewalk. Not good. Gender breakdown by age. So why is it important? I think I've sort of covered this a little bit. It's important to identify veterans in your caseload or in the people who are calling you, because there are special programs and services that are only available to veterans. And I'm going to be a little crass about it. There's money, right? You show me a homeless 50-year-old man who's not a veteran, and he will be on a waiting list at the Salvation Army. Show me a 50-year-old man who's a veteran with an honorable discharge, and he is most likely going to get into housing within 1 or 2 days. There are programs, there are vouchers. I don't know if you saw, I think it was in the paper this morning, they're cutting even more of the Section 8 vouchers. They're giving more of the HUD-VASH vouchers, and those are the VA or the veteran, basically Section 8. It's a HUD, VA supportive housing grant. Those are increasing right now. Because what do you know, to end veterans' homelessness, it helps to give them a voucher that pays for their rent. Right? Rocket science. A lot of people ask questions about veterans benefits. One of the sort of taglines I use when I talk about my job is that I don't do veterans law. I do poverty law for veterans. So I do a lot of what you've probably seen in other presentations: criminal expungement, child support, debt collection, housing, employment, those types of issues. We also do both criminal and civil law. Veteran status and your discharge status does have an effect on what benefits you're eligible for. Your time of service has an effect largely on the education benefits, what programs are going to be available to you. I think rather than trying to inundate you guys with all of the specifics about each program, we're going to sort of leave it broad and say, send them to us. Send them to the VSO, send them to the VA, send them to MACV, and we can help determine what programs they're eligible for. One thing I probably should mention earlier in the presentation, I did mention that I work with homeless veterans specifically. Most veterans are more successful than non-veterans. Most veterans earn more money than non-veterans. Most veterans are more highly educated than non-veterans. One of the struggles, though, is that for veterans in poverty, I think they're 5 times more likely to slip into homelessness than a non-veteran who lives in poverty. So while veterans overall are more successful than non-veterans, for the veterans who are struggling, it tends to be sort of a what's the term, not coexisting disorder, but it's not one thing, right? It's not just something happened to my bank account, I wasn't able to pay rent this month, I'll be fine next month. It tends to be an interconnected nature of issues that can be harder to resolve, but we have a lot of resources to do that. And so certainly I want to be clear that not every veteran has post-traumatic stress, right? Not every veteran has TBI. You'll notice I don't use the term PTSD, largely because I don't think it's a disorder. It's a completely natural human reaction to things they've seen, done, witnessed, and been a part of. One of the statistics, I have a friend, Brock Hunter, who does a great presentation on combat trauma and the history of it, tracing it all the way back to Odysseus. He traces it way, way back. But one of the things he talks about is that in World War II, the people who fought onto the beach in Normandy, right? The people who fought for 60 days into France, 98% were discharged for combat trauma at the end of that 60-day period. The 2% who were not discharged for combat trauma were discharged for having psychopathic personalities. If you don't have some trauma related to those 60 days, there is something wrong with you, right? PTSD, and the way we talk about it, I think makes people feel like they're broken. There's something wrong with them for reacting that way. And I think, once again, anyone who works in social services knows you can talk to people who've been on the streets for 5 years, who have post-traumatic stress from the decisions they have to make on a day-to-day basis to survive. So certainly post-traumatic stress is not limited to combat trauma. There are cases of people having post-traumatic stress who didn't serve in country, who were controlling the drones out of a bunker somewhere in Colorado, but they still have feelings of post-traumatic stress because of their involvement, because of things they did that may have violated their personal moral code or they're not comfortable with, or they saw things, even on video, that got to them. And so one of the things, if you're working with somebody who's a veteran, A, don't assume they have post-traumatic stress. Right now it's about 30%, I think, are diagnosed with it. B, but if they're struggling with some of those issues, nightmares, having problems sleeping, those are things that there are programs for. There's counseling, there are medications that help some people, and so getting those people connected to the VA is very powerful in terms of making sure that they have all the support that they need. There are also other mental and physical health issues. Obviously, physical injury, traumatic brain injury, sort of the invisible injury of these wars. You may not see anything, But if you are in a Humvee that gets hit, right? I mean, I think what somebody told me is it's just like jiggling your brain inside your head and it bounces off things. You may not see any damage, but that person could have some cognitive impairments, could have some problems with attention, could have some problems with following through on directions. Also, depression, suicide, anxiety. Maybe not to the level of post-traumatic stress or PTSD, but certainly something that could impact that person's ability to navigate the legal system on their own, for instance. And then addiction and self-medication. A lot of folks maybe who have not gotten a diagnosis or not enrolled in any programming may be self-medicating to try to deal with what they're going through. Does anyone know what the most common tool of self-medication is amongst veterans? Any guesses?
Alcohol.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. So then we see.
You want to state that might.
Oh, sorry. He's alcohol would be the most common drug or substance used by veterans to self-medicate. Then we get involved with the justice system, right? We have drunk driving. We have domestic abuse, which oftentimes is tied to alcohol use. And these are the things that we're seeing veterans pop up through veterans courts, but also just through the normal traditional court process. Then the connection between homelessness and incarceration. Homelessness is criminalized in a large part. People make decisions to do things that put them on the wrong side of the law. The VA euphemistically refers to them as justice-involved veterans. I just picture them wearing capes, right? Like flying. No, they've committed crimes and are being convicted of them. Justice involved. But they've done a great job of bringing more resources to look at the interconnectedness of mental health issues, the court system, criminalization, and homelessness. And then obviously any interaction with the criminal justice systems makes it a lot harder to find them jobs and housing, right? And so we have a lot of relationships with employers around the state where we can work with them to develop those relationships. So if they know that we think the person's a good fit, they're going to have maybe a higher likelihood of placing that person with their organization. Look, he's caught in red tape. Sorry. I like moving pictures. They're fun, right? So we've talked about this in relation to legal issues. You know, you don't want to send someone with severe anxiety into court to represent themselves, right? That's not going to go well. You don't want to send somebody who's actively abusing substances into court, self-represented, to respond to the judge. But there's also a lot of issues that I think are maybe a little bit more specific to veterans. Distrust of the system and bureaucracies. The importance of respect is a huge thing. Yeah.
Again, I'm sorry, but we try and do is tie in our points from other trainings. So some of you may recall my top 10 points, top 10 takeaways from the training last year. Remember, one of those takeaways was process, helping our callers to understand that when they call and they're dealing with a legal issue, it's not going to be overnight. Chances are they're going to encounter frustration, but the key is to get the word process into their mind so that they understand they are going through a process before they get from A to Z or whatever the resolution is. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I guess I've got one. So you mentioned that 60 consecutive days in jail will cut off benefits. Can you guys generally still help a veteran at that point, or do you refer them on to somewhere else where they might,
Yeah, no, very good question. And actually, I'm going to get to it a little bit later, but there is a new program through the VA medical centers, VA healthcare system, sorry, they changed the acronym on me, Veterans Justice Outreach Workers, and some of those are reentry specialists. So they actually go and talk to veterans who are incarcerated before they're released to start working on that plan. Okay. Homelessness is a huge issue for people leaving prison. It's harder to find them housing and employment, but if we can identify them while they're in there, we can have a better chance of working together and creating a team to support them. So the VA knows who's in there. They're not allowed to, I think there are some restrictions on the services they can provide while the person is incarcerated, but they're really ramping up their efforts to identify people before they get released. So we're not catching them in the homeless programs 2 months after they got released from prison. So there are a lot more efforts to sort of make that connection with the Department of Corrections.
And I think the state also operates an outreach program that will meet with individuals before they come out of jail or prison. And the benefit will restart.
Okay. All right.
Once, if that was the behind the question, yes. Once they're out again, the benefit does restart.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans, just an overview of sort of all of our programs. The legal component is just a very small portion of what we do. We run transitional housing. We have offices in Mankato, the Twin Cities, and Duluth. We also have outreach workers in Little Falls and the Detroit Lakes area and Red Lake, as well as teams out of the offices that go out to every corner of the state to identify veterans, work with the county veteran service offices to identify who may need our help. What we can provide to veterans, if they're not living in our transitional housing, we can also help with rental assistance. In greater Minnesota, we can help with mortgage payments. We can help with utilities. If they're behind in utilities and facing a shutoff, we bought a cord of wood for somebody in St. Louis County because their house was heated by something that burns wood, apparently, right? So we're going to try to fit our response to what their needs are. We also have case management and outreach, which I think is probably the biggest part of our staff are people who actually go out and talk to veterans, go to the homeless shelters, go to the food shelves, identify people in the community. We try to go to where the veterans are instead of wait for them to come to us. We also provide employment assistance through job clubs. So we'll help with resumes, we'll help with job placement, we'll help with interviewing skills for veterans, because employment is an integral part of their plan for moving forward and getting back on their feet. And then lastly, the legal clinics and stand-down events. Have you guys ever heard of stand-downs? Great, wonderful. So it's basically a 1 or 2 day service event where all the service providers come to one location and provide the services on site. It's not, it's not a flyer fair. We're not going out there and just handing a brochure and saying, talk to us later. We're actually providing the services on site, so we don't have to bounce the people around. So if somebody needs help with setting up a mental health appointment, plus they need some legal advice, plus they really need a haircut, all of those things can be done on site at stand down. My life goal is to be as popular as the haircuts. Another interesting and important thing to mention about the stand downs is we do homeless courts on site. We actually bring in judges, we bring in court admin, no pre-screening necessary. If they have outstanding tickets, if they have fines related to misdemeanors, if they have court fees, we can wipe them off. We actually give them community service credit for going and making appointments with other service providers at the event. So if someone is actively homeless and needs help with mental health issues, their community service that we're taking in exchange for wiping off those fines and fees is actually going and making an appointment with a mental health provider, going and making an appointment with a housing provider. And that counts as their community service. In all honesty, that does so much more for all of us than sending them outside to, tear down tables or pick up cigarette butts. This is actually giving them credit for doing what they need to do to move forward. I think we wiped off over $20,000 at last year's event in fines and fees. One gentleman was most of that. He had something like 17 driving after revocation charges. Okay, by show of hands, how many of us think people actually stop driving when they lose their license? Right? This man was just the worst at it ever. He got caught like every other day. It was ridiculous. And they just kept adding up. And now all of a sudden, it's not $400 to get your license back. It's $8,700 to get your license back. Well, he can't get a job. He lives in rural Minnesota without a car. Well, okay, he had a car, and obviously he was driving it, but without a legal right to drive your car, right, it's going to be a lot harder for you to get that job. Without the job, you're not going to be able to pay back the fines and fees, and it was just this horrible cycle. And so he was able to, we wiped off $8,700. He was able to, remove the hold from his driver's license. He got his license back, and now he's looking for employment. Another important thing to mention is we actually get statewide jurisdiction for the stand-down court. So it doesn't matter where the offense or the fine or the fee occurred in the state of Minnesota, we can deal with it at any of our stand-down events. So maybe, actually quite likely, people get DUIs or driving after revocations between here and St. Cloud. St. Cloud is the inpatient treatment hospital for veterans in Minnesota. A lot of issues happen between here and St. Cloud. It doesn't matter if you live in Stearns County, have an issue in Dakota County, we can resolve that at the Minneapolis event or any of the other 10 events that we run around the state. Yeah.
I have a question that's not necessarily legal, but since you were kind of covering all the services, a lot of the veterans that I get who are callers have registered as veterans, have gone to the different vet services, and are just frustrated because one vet agency doesn't talk to another agency, and they're not getting the services that they think that they need. And when they explain the situation to me, it seems like they should be getting it. Obviously we're only getting one side of the situation, but do you have any helpful advice for
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it, I mean, I think I will speak for MACV and say that we really focus on strong relationships and not duplicating services and being at the table with our community partners like the VA or the County Veterans Service offices. I think if you start with referrals, or if you make sure that they've talked to one of the big three, which in my mind are the VSOs, the VA, and MACV, we know what other people are doing. So it can be harder for a smaller group, maybe it's a yellow ribbon committee in Detroit Lakes. They may not have a full sense of all the programs and services out there, or they may have a more limited mission. So I think that if you can start with the broader groups like the VA, County Veterans Service offices, they really know who's out there doing what, and hopefully can reduce sort of the bouncing around. Did you want to?
Yeah, I would comment that a lot of those people are probably frustrated with VA. They're frustrated with the fact that they're ineligible or a claim or request has been denied. And I think it's really a common feeling when you're trying to deal with bureaucracies in general, and then they kind of give you that runaround in the loop. I think the VSO can sort that out, and I'll kind of speak to how that works in my remarks. But I think it is a good idea to refer to the VSO in the county where they reside. Okay. If they're unhappy with that individual, largely they can get some help or direction from organizations like MACV or the state of Minnesota to another individual. I know we get a lot of referrals to our office because we answer our phones and return calls. And I know that I'm sure you get that as one of your big complaints. So I think, first, their local county VSO, if they're frustrated with them, then, MACV, the state operates outreach as well, just to try and kind of, because really I can sort that out. And I can actually be direct enough with them about their potential for success or where they're at and explain it to them to kind of put a lot of that to rest. But
Maria, isn't it true also that somebody can go to a different VSO that's not necessarily in the county in which they live?
Yes,
Is that
yes,
correct?
they can. Each office is allowed to, create their own practice, and a lot of times they really don't want to see people that do not reside in that particular county, and you may have encountered that. But largely, we do have the latitude to serve any veteran anywhere, and it is kind of a case-by-case decision in my office. For example, we do serve all of the Ramsey County employees because it's easier for them. They don't live in Ramsey County, but it's easier for them if they're advocating on behalf of a veteran. So yes, the answer is yes. The Veteran Service Officer can see any veteran. It's not necessarily just from their own county.
Ann, you had a question?
Yeah, just kind of a follow-up question on Jennifer's question. Do you guys network with the new Obama Center, the Minneapolis Veteran Referral Center, Resource and Referral Center? Do you guys have any connections or
Around the Affordable Care Act, is that what you're talking about?
I'm aware that they also have a lot of similar services at MACV, like just help with housing, employment.
So the Obama
The
Center.
CRRC?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's the CRC. That's VA.
Okay.
Yep.
And so it's the Fed, and it's the Fed's health care that has oversight to that.
I don't know if we're talking about the same thing. It's the new center in Minneapolis.
On Harmon Place?
Yes, that's
Yep.
it. Okay.
Yeah, that's the
okay.
VA.
Okay.
It is actually,
so
it would be comparable to, the VA operates community-based outpatient clinics,
Okay.
and there's a number of them around the state in different counties. That is VA's effort to address homelessness in the same manner that Opportunity House, if you're familiar with what that is, does. So it's a resource center that targets veterans, but it is operated by the VA healthcare system. I think a lot of times people may
Okay.
not really actually know that.
No.
Yeah.
And yes, we work with them. I do outreach there twice a month, the first and third Thursdays, and just take open walk-in clients and work with them as much as I can, given the time I have. And then we also have our employment coordinator and outreach people go there, I think 2 or 3 times a week. They have community provider rooms, so other providers can come in and provide services. So the State Department is there. Wendy is an amazing resource. She's down there a good amount of the time. But then that's where they've moved all of their healthcare for homeless veterans. So all the case managers and social workers who are working with these veterans are housed down there, which is awesome because that's much closer to where many of them are staying.
Sarah, let me ask if you could interject here. How many employees associated with MACV?
26.
And Maria, how many employees do you have?
There will be a total of 5 in our office, but we also have 2 VA work study, and we work with volunteers as well.
And the reason I asked for that is that one of the benefits of a referral to either of these organizations is that you're dealing with a lot less moving parts. And you're dealing with people who
That's a good
don't have to talk to somebody else to get some information for the caller. So that is again one of the wonderments of these two organizations, because they recognize the value of leveraging and collaborating. And so again, as you're making your choices going through your fields, as you have your caller on the line, these are the kinds of choices that are going to be efficient. They're going to be obviously very respectful, and they are also hubs of information for other organizations. So the ability to get the caller, if they can't help, the caller to someone else without legal or a social service need is going to be enhanced. And I know that Sarah's going to talk a little bit more about the legal here that MACV does.
That is a good comment, though.
But
Because that's the frustration. That's
And I was
kind of
gonna-
what
yeah.
I was asking.
And I was going to go back to what you said earlier, because oftentimes what I'll do is if I have a veteran who I think Maria's office can help, I will call Maria and talk to someone in her office before sending the veteran to her.
It helps.
Right? Because I understand that people get frustrated with getting bounced around and not
Repeating their story.
repeating their story. And so
Not
whether it's a
having the
legal referral,
funding
yeah.
for the transportation to go to the
Yep.
other office if they're not going to get help.
Right.
Well, we had that young female veteran, Maria, if you remember her, who only had enough gas to go 10 miles, and the VSO in her county wasn't there, the one that she had built a trust relationship with. And we needed to get her some domestic violence support as quickly as possible. I called Maria. The woman also had a final that morning. And I was like, call your professor. I'm sure you can get it delayed. I'm a professor. They'll do that. They'll be fine. Just call. While she was doing that, I called Maria and said, Maria, do you have time? Are you in the office? Can you talk to this veteran? Here's what I understand of her story. Maria said, yes. I called the veteran back on her cell phone. I said, it's going to be worth the 5 miles of gas you need to get there. They're going to have some support. And so we were able to get her into the system that way. And we didn't, she had 20 minutes left on her cell phone, 10 miles of gas left. We had to.
I bet you get a lot of those calls.
It didn't make sense to bounce her around, and we need to give her some solid advice that she knew she could follow up on. I don't want to send people on a wild goose chase because they're just going to come back to me angry. They can find me. My phone number is everywhere, right? It behooves me to provide the best services and do the groundwork to make sure that the referral I'm giving them is actually going to work out.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, if I'm giving them a legal referral, I say, if this doesn't work out for any reason, call me back and I will find another referral. So I'm not a one-shot, you talk to me once and that's your chance to talk to a free lawyer. I am more than happy and do all the time, talk to people for months and months and months trying to find them the right assistance. So I'm not the end of the chain necessarily, but I'm going to stick with them, whether they're a client of ours or not.
Likewise.
good information,
yep.
right?
So we are doing a great job at combating veterans homelessness right now. We are in year 4 of the VA's plan to end veterans homelessness. I'll let you in a secret. We're not going to end veterans homelessness in the next year. But I appreciate that General Shinseki, when he made this goal, his goal wasn't let's reduce it by 10%, right? That's just a namby-pamby goal. His goal was end it. Phoenix, Arizona has now claimed to have housed the last chronically homeless veteran in their city. That's huge, right? We're taking a huge chunk out of it here in Minnesota. We're not there yet. But we need, once again, why it's so important to be here with you guys is the more people we can identify, that's part of the challenge, is identifying the veterans who need our help. The more we can identify, the more we can provide services to, the more chronically homeless we can get off the street, out of shelter, out of someone's garage, wherever it is that they're staying. 1/5 of homeless males are veterans. When you think about the access to resources, benefits, and support that these individuals have through the VA system, they should not be homeless. The VA is throwing housing vouchers at this. There are programs like MACV that are getting additional funding to pay rent and deposits for people. I don't think anyone should be homeless. I should make that clear. Veterans should really not be homeless with a number of supportive programs that are there to help. Veterans of color are overrepresented, and Vietnam veterans are overrepresented in the homeless population. One of the things that I think is exciting about doing this work right now is that we are in place to prevent what happened to the Vietnam veterans when they returned to happening to this group. And if you think of some of the challenges of the Vietnam veterans, once again, those are 1 or 2 tours. We're dealing with people now who have done 6 or 7, and that's going to create a whole nother layer of issues in trying to provide services. You had a question?
I do. With the help towards rent and mortgage, is that ongoing?
or an emergency basis?
It is actually, it's,
Repeat the question.
the question was with the rental assistance, is that ongoing or is it emergency? It's actually neither. We only pay rent or deposits if it's something that's sustainable for the veteran. So we're not going to pay their rent if they lost their job and have no way to pay rent. We're going to help them find a housing solution that is sustainable. We have limits to how many months we can pay rent for a veteran. I believe it's 3 months, and how far back we can pay rent. It's definitely an emergency assistance program, but it's not throwing money at you this month when there's no plan for ongoing stability. So we're really focused on how do we get bang for our buck in terms of supporting them financially. Is that going to be paying rent at a place that's not sustainable for them to stay in, or is it helping them find adequate housing that meets their needs that they might be able to afford, either through connecting them with the VA resources to get benefits, coming to a legal clinic and lowering their child support obligations so they have more money left over at the end of the month to pay rent. So we're really focused on their long-term stability, and so while we use rental assistance to get them out of the bind, if that bind doesn't have an answer to it long-term, it's probably not something we're going to pay money for.
But you will do something else for them.
Oh, certainly, yes. We're not going to say, oh no, you have no plan of success.
But
Call back when you've got one. I mean,
one comment I would make is that Ramsey County has recently implemented, it's called coordinated assessment, and it's the one-stop intake. Somebody's nodding their head that they may be familiar with that. And hopefully it'll be metro-wide soon, but I think Ramsey is really, and we implemented already. So the point there is to screen the individual or the family to try and glean what the need is, and then they're going to prioritize those individuals. But they provide the spectrum of assessment. So they're going to assess for transitional housing options, permanent housing options, etc. So that might be a good option and one that I would certainly refer to. And then the programs that the Veteran Service Officer advocates for are largely emergency in basis. There really isn't, besides HUD-VASH, which there is a limited number of vouchers and an extremely long waiting list for, and that is the federal vouchers that are like Section 8. There really isn't an ongoing kind of a payment. Gosh, I wish there was.
So do we.
Yeah, I bet you do.
free rent for all, that's what I say. Yes.
Now, the services you're talking about are for veterans. How many of these other services apply for like family members? Say if a veteran has passed away and their family needs help, or even like say the veteran is paying child support. Do any of these programs apply to the family, to the kids at all?
Our legal clinics are pretty broadly define who we serve. I had a phone conversation with the widow of a veteran who technically isn't eligible for our programs, but there weren't any other resources to help her draft the will. So I said, come to the clinic. I create the screening procedure so I can change it when I want to, and I changed it for her, so we were able to help her because there weren't any other resources for her. I think it's really limited to it's program dependent a lot of times.
It is program dependent, but there are actually a lot of benefits for the family, the surviving spouse, the dependents. And that's, I think, one of the main reasons that it's important to refer to people like me, the Veteran Service Officers, because they're going to be able to kind of sort all that out. For example, the state operates a program called State Soldiers Assistance, and the widow can access that benefit. It is a once-in-a-lifetime grant, but the widow can access that benefit, and the dental and optical benefit they offer as well. So there are programs, it just needs to be sorted out by somebody that actually understands the spectrum.
It's a very good question, though. Did you have a?
Do you see the American Legion active and also helping, because I'm aware that they do help financially. You guys think that's a good resource?
Well, the American Legions they're largely the posts locally, and then they operate a claims office in cooperation with the state of Minnesota, the Department of Veterans Affairs. So there's kind of two separate levels of the American Legion. I wouldn't think that a direct referral to the American Legion or a post would be as effective largely, because they're going to end up getting referred around to people like Sara or myself from a post. And also the posts have funds, then they will actually serve, but typically you have to be a member of the post before they're going to provide an emergency kind of a help. So.
Well, and the VSOs know which posts in their county are active and which may have resources. So once again, I think going in at the top level to the people like Maria who know what's out there in their county is probably the best way to go.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So let me ask a 2013 to 2014 question. And that is, are your services now, for example, with spouse, based on same-sex marriages? So if you have a same-sex spouse, are they going to be
Yes,
eligible for benefits
Yeah,
just
the
as
VA,
anyone
the
else?
Fed has already sent out direction on that particular
Make sure we have the
topic.
camera.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm speaking to, yeah, the Fed has actually already sent out direction on the topic of same-sex marriage. And the fact that they are, I mean, we see the states going in that direction, and I think they recognize that they have to recognize those unions, and they actually have to provide the benefits for those individuals, so.
Great.
So the VA has only recently started looking at legal issues as a barrier to veteran success. And part of what they've done is provided funding through the SSVF grant, which is what pays for me, which is why when I called and asked them to hire me, they said yes. They had just gotten a very large grant from the VA. And one of the things that had never happened before was that in addition to spending money on case management, housing, rent, utilities, we can now spend money on legal, which is huge, right? Before you could refer to legal aid. I love legal aid. A lot of my friends are legal aid attorneys, but the number of people they're able to help and the strictness of their priorities makes it very difficult for most veterans to get services through those offices. They also have, for the first time, have now allowed legal clinics on site at VA facilities. I know this is being taped, but when I first started the clinics, we were not technically allowed to do clinics at the VA hospitals. I think it was because the VA didn't want to prioritize or give special treatment to certain providers over other providers. And in all honesty, I don't think they were familiar enough with the local legal services community to understand how collaboratively we work together. I think the first official clinic was held in Texas at a VA facility, I think. I believe there are over 30 hospitals now that host them. There's one in Los Angeles that actually has a full-time attorney in an office provided by the VA to give brief advice and referrals. So in 3 years, it's completely changed. They also added Veterans Justice Outreach workers. We have 2 out of the Minneapolis hospital, David and Ariana. David works primarily with the Veterans Treatment Court, so he's the one reporting to the court on the veteran's progress through their case management plan. Did the veteran make their appointments? Are they taking their medication? Are they checking in when they're supposed to check in? That helps the court and probation team decide whether or not the person is moving on to the next phase of the treatment court process. And then Ariana does the reentry program. Actually just met with her right before I came here today. She does a lot of work with identifying people in the prisons. She does visits to the prisons to help them come up with a plan as they're getting out. And so they've actually now really focused on what are these barriers, both in the civil and criminal justice system, that they need to address to be able to help their veterans succeed. Part of this was because of a report called the Challenge Report. It's Community Housing and LENG, which stands for something. And they surveyed homeless veterans, formerly homeless veterans, and service providers and said, what are the biggest unmet needs? My jaw was on the floor. The biggest unmet need of homeless veterans is not housing. It was almost all things tied to the law, which is kind of embarrassing for my profession. So criminal charges and convictions, child support, lack of driver's license, unpaid fines and fees. Lack of driver's license is usually tied to unpaid child support or fines and fees. But these were things that were really causing, it's self-identified, causing the barriers to the person's success. And that's, I think, what really focused the VA on addressing legal issues as well as housing, employment, counseling, all of those things. And so this is something that's really sparked the veterans community and the legal community to focus on these things. The SSVF grant I mentioned before, when it started, I believe there were only a handful, maybe a dozen plus, doing anything in legal. Even though the grant said we could use the money for legal, it just wasn't what most of the housing providers were comfortable doing or had a background in doing. Now there are over 75 grantees who are doing something with their legal component to provide those services. So like I said, we've seen an exponential growth in legal services available to veterans. The most recent challenge report just came out, and I'm proud to say a lot of those legal issues have dropped off the top 10. What I do is not rocket science. The issues I help people with are not the most complex legal issues in the world. It's child support compliance, criminal expungement, debt collection, things you don't have to be the world's smartest attorney to do necessarily. I'm not calling myself dumb. I'm just saying these are sometimes just connecting people to the right resource, right? If you have an issue in child support, what's the first thing you should do? If you can't afford to pay your child support order anymore, anyone know?
Call your child support office.
Call your child support office. Now, if I owed somebody $80,000 and I just lost my job, would my first thought be, I better call them and tell them where I live and that I can't pay them? No. Not even close, right? It's completely reasonable that they're not doing that. What I do is I bring child support into my legal clinics. They're there to give us a report. They can look into their database and find out, who does that person owe money to? How much do they owe? What steps can we take to help them resolve it? Sometimes their child support worker can put a freeze on the interest and get them into a compliance payment without anyone having to go to court.
So it's better to have them call child support than to have them call like the self-help center to file paperwork to get in front of a judge.
Oh yes. So you want, I mean, in child support specifically, one of the problems in child support is that you can't control which way the order goes when you bring the case. So you want an attorney or someone at the courts, I mean, yes, you want self-help center or vet law or another attorney to look at the case to determine what's the likely outcome. We don't want people going into court without an understanding of what the process is. And just because they can't afford it, sadly, does not mean that that's going to go down. Because a whole bunch of factors play into that order. And if they go in without a good understanding of what it is that's underlying that, either they may not qualify for a modification, get kicked out and get frustrated by that, or they may reopen the case only to find it go up. Which you really, I mean, that hurts your credibility, something fierce, right? Like that's not a good outcome. At the bottom, I just listed sort of the types of issues we see. Like any other poverty law program, we see a lot of family law. We see a lot of things related to family law, whether it's custody, parenting time, child support, divorce. It's our big one. So here's what our legal program does. For your purposes, all you need to know is send people to me. You have my phone number. I answer my phone. I don't have a system. People are surprised, like, well, I need to talk to Sarah. I'm like, this is Sarah. You answered your phone. I'm like, well, it rang. What else am I supposed to do with it, right? So I can give brief advice, triage, referrals over the phone. I probably talk to about 20 to 30 veterans a day in addition to running the clinics and the other parts of my job. If I know a resource, if they qualify for legal aid, I'm going to call legal aid and tell them to keep an eye out for the veteran and refer the veteran to legal aid. If they don't qualify for legal aid, but they may have enough money or benefits to do a payment plan, I have pro bono attorneys and other attorneys who are willing to do payment plans with veterans, willing to help them low bono, pro bono, or if it's something we can deal with at the next clinic, I'll refer them to the next clinic, and that's where we'll really dig into their case if it's something that's not extremely time sensitive. Our legal clinics are held every other month at the VA Medical Center in Minneapolis. We also hold them at the St. Cloud VA Hospital quarterly. I go around the state during spring break. I take a van full of law students up to northern Minnesota. Sounds like fun, right? March, drive to Bemidji, the van full of law students. What could be better? But it's great because that allows us to hit Bemidji and Hibbing and Grand Rapids and all the towns that we may not be able to get to when we don't have access to law students who are able to do the intake, help with some of the pro se forms. It really does expand what we're able to do on site at our clinics. So we're not just giving advice and telling them to go do it. We are screening them to see if they're pro se eligible, right? Meaning, are they capable of representing themselves in court? Going back to my earlier story, it would have been so great if I'd been able to find that veteran in Duluth an attorney to speak on his behalf in court, right? That would have solved pretty much all of his problems. I wasn't able to do that. I must have made 30 odd calls for him trying to find someone to help. I couldn't do it. I couldn't find the resources. So we're also going out and talking to local bar associations, trying to explain the need for these services so we have more resources around the state. We also have attorneys here in the city who are willing to Skype or FaceTime into rural clinics. So maybe I don't want to take a local bankruptcy attorney's entire day to come and sit there when I'm going to see 12 people and I don't know if they have bankruptcy issues. If I have somebody on the phone, I can call down here, set up an appointment over FaceTime, over Skype, have the consultation, even if we're in Bemidji, and then provide follow-up services on site at the clinic. So we're really trying to leverage all of our relationships and all of our connections to provide the best services we can regardless of where we're located. We also have representation partnerships with 5 of the legal aid organizations. So you know I mentioned that we can use our money to provide legal services. This is how we do it. We pay legal aid $1,000 to prioritize our veterans' cases that are directly related to their homelessness. Now that doesn't mean landlord-tenant law, right? If someone's getting evicted for non-payment of rent, it's going to take a really, really crafty attorney to get you out of that, right? Because you didn't pay your rent. There's not a really great defense to that most of the time. We would just pay your rent, right? But what if it's child support? What if somebody gets $800 a month through their employment and they're being charged $600 a month in child support? If we can lower your child support order, you then have enough money to live on. So we do a lot of family law cases. We've done a couple of divorces where there was a custody battle over the kids, and having the kids would allow the veteran parent to stay in their family-based housing. I am willing to bend over backwards to define that connection to housing if I have to. There are some things I can't make work, but if we can make it work, we will. They still have to qualify for legal aid financially, but a lot of times cases that maybe wouldn't be priorities become priorities because of the payment. And I'm not above using that.
Sarah, before you switch, on
Yeah.
the legal clinics, how many are you doing a year now?
I'm shooting for 30 this year. I did 26 last year, serving 1,200 veterans around the state and Fargo.
All right. And so get on your radar, because we're going to better coordinate with MACV about their legal clinics. And you're gonna start sending
Yep.
211 directly the notices of when the clinics are gonna take place.
That could really
So that will be the kind of thing to maybe sticky note somewhere,
Yeah.
you know, and be aware of as you're getting your callers, okay? Because give us a 30-second, how's the clinic work? It starts at what time and what happens?
The Minneapolis clinics run from 9 to 2. We will help anyone who comes in before 2. So we stick around until about 3:30 or 4. You go through a quick intake process where we identify, in addition to your legal issue, your housing stability status. Do you have a case manager at the VA? We want to know as much as we can about who you're already connected to, because the answer is not always legal. Right? What somebody defines as a legal issue may not actually be a legal issue in our eyes. We want to make sure we can connect them to all of the resources they need. Once they go through intake, they get placed with an attorney who has experience in their question. So we have an attorney wait list where we know what area of law they're looking for. We have our volunteer attorneys who come from private practice, solo small practice, legal aid. It started with just a group of my friends who I could convince to come and help me out. And it's actually turned into a huge program. We have about 90 volunteer attorneys. I just met with an in-house counsel office this morning who wants to come do it. From the volunteers' perspective, we have a lot of fun. You know you're doing a good work, and our clients are amazing. They're just fun to talk to. And so we're getting more and more interest in doing it. And so we're looking to actually expand our clinics to monthly, hopefully starting in June of this year, so we can see more people and not have as much of a wait between the clinics. I talked about standown already. Interstate referrals. I'm part of the American Bar Association, co-chair of the Coordinating Committee on Veterans Benefits and Services. What a title. And so I have a network around the country of people. So if you get a caller who's a veteran who's struggling with a child support order out of California, still send them to me. I may not be able to practice law in California, but I know people who can, and there's this fancy thing called the internet. And has all sorts of amazing information. So if I'm in a clinic and somebody comes up and says, I've got a child support issue in Oklahoma, I'll turn to a law student and say, can you find out if there's child support forums online for Oklahoma? And they'll look at me blankly and I'll say, go Google the words child support in Oklahoma, right? Like, this is not an in-depth research project, just Google it, right? And because there's all sorts of self-help information in a lot of states. So I can actually help people progress in their case even without giving them advice, right? I can explain to them the process, show them where the forms are, and make sure they're putting the answers in the forms that correspond to what the forms are asking for. I can also find attorneys in other states through my national network. So even though I'm only licensed to practice law in Minnesota, you are more than welcome to send me people with legal issues elsewhere, because I'm connected into that network that should be able to help me find someone to assist that veteran.
And actually, I would make that a priority referral rather than sending them to legal aid or something like that. You know, send them to MACV, and then if Sarah thinks that legal aid here in the state can work with them, she will make that referral.
Yeah, well, and actually something we're doing right now, and I'm very excited, I really hope it works, my fingers are crossed. We have a child support case out of California for a veteran who lives in northern Minnesota. SSVF, our funding source is federal. As far as I can tell, there's nothing to stop me from paying a legal partner in California to represent a veteran who lives in Minnesota. And if we can get all of the people with that grant doing that, we may have resources everywhere. So regardless of where the person has a problem, we may be able to address that and help that legal aid office afford to be able to provide that assistance. This is just a little bit more about our legal partnerships. I've once again gone into Maria's time, so I'm going to run through the rest of these. This is just a map of where our legal clinics are held. I'm looking to expand to western Minnesota this year. I want to go out to Wilmer, Fergus Falls. We're going to hold a stand-down event in. So we try to get pretty much everywhere. Like I said, we bring in Bill from Maria's office, comes to our clinics, provides assistance. A lot of veterans think access to disability benefits is a legal issue. Here in Minnesota, we're very privileged to have a great VA facility. They do it's not necessarily a quick turnaround time, but they're very clear with veterans for the most part what they have to provide and maybe what they were missing in their application. So rather than tell them veterans benefits aren't a legal issue in Minnesota, we bring in the people who can provide those services because we know the question's going to come up. We also have brought in pro bono financial planners. Sometimes it's a question of budgeting, understanding how much money is coming in and how much money is going out. Anything we think that ties into those legal issues, we're going to try to wrap into our legal program so that it's, once again, it's more of a one-stop shop. It's not being bounced around between several different offices. These are just some useful things I thought would be important to bring up. I think I've covered most of these. One of the things that I think comes up a lot is that veterans do not consider veterans benefits income because they're not taxed as income. But it is considered for child support. It is considered for eligibility for legal services programs. So one thing we do is we ask not only do you have income, but do you receive any benefits? Because they may not include their benefits in their income. That's something that actually hurts them a ton in child support. They don't declare their benefits, they get into court, and they're getting $3,200 a month in VA disability benefits. That's going to severely impact what happens with that court order, right? That's a large amount of money. And so that's one of the things you need to watch out for, is that sometimes veterans don't consider what we may consider income to be income based on its tax status. I think the other thing, I think there's some questions that Ellie sent out about military sexual trauma, which is certainly something that's gotten a lot of attention. I think it's good that it's getting more attention. I think one thing that's sort of being missed is that there are actually an equal number of male and female victims of military sexual trauma. Percentage-wise, there are more female victims as a percentage of the military population, but I think it's something that people think about as a female soldier issue or a female service member issue, when really it's something that does apply across the board in many cases. Additional resources, the JAG unit helps retired and disabled veterans. They do not have enough resources to serve everybody who qualifies for their program. I'm happy to talk to people and then try to refer them to JAG. I have a lot of contacts there. I work with them pretty closely. But they also don't provide a ton of full representation services. So they do more brief advice, trying to point people in the right direction. There's also a Military and Veterans Affairs section of the Minnesota State Bar Association that I'm on the council for. And we are just reinvigorating a pro bono listserv right now. For the time being, it's limited to active duty military service members who have issues that are related to their deployments. But as we try to strengthen that, we're going to probably try to expand that to other areas. So for now, I'd say send people to me if I think that's a good resource for them. If it's up and running, I will certainly send them to that as well. And now I will hand it over to Maria.
Go ahead.
Good. Thanks, Sarah. So I would just as soon actually dialogue with you, answer any questions, make sure that your questions get answered. So please, by all means, interrupt me. I'm just going to tell you briefly what the Veteran Service Officer is and kind of a little bit about how it works. It is in state statute. It is required by the law. There is at least one in every county in Minnesota. The county provides the resources to create the operation, and typically, the number of veteran service officers in each county is driven by the number of veterans that are identified residing in that county, which, as Sarah mentioned, is a number that is based on who's already getting benefits. So it's really not a very accurate number. The veteran service officers are trained by the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs, and they are certified. We have to be certified annually to the job. And some of the reason for that is that they want to make sure that we are constantly upgrading our training, learning about new programs and benefits, and that we actually understand eligibility. So the certification does require that you pass various tests. American Legion is a big partner in the training. So are the other service organizations, VFW, DAV, and the accreditation that they provide, the training that they provide, gives us access to look into the VA system. So it's a real big part of what the veteran service officers do. So that's a federal, state, and service organization partnership training the veteran service officers so that they understand the eligibility and benefits. So big part of what we do is advocate, and that was the reason that the statute was created. In the counties of Minnesota, you might just have an office of one where there's veterans under 1,000, or Hennepin County, for example, with 64,000 veterans, has about 14 officers. And the service model for each varies. So what you might find when you refer to one office as opposed to another is going to be very different. Each can operate, they have some autonomy in how they operate, and they develop their service model based on that. So don't be discouraged if you feel like one isn't working as effectively as another. You can try another. There is a database out there. The state keeps a database. I did provide a link to Ellie for the materials, so hopefully that you'll be able to access that way. That's one way. But you can always tell people with access to the internet to just search their own county name and veteran services, and it's going to be near the top of the list, typically. So who do we serve? We serve anybody that is advocating for a veteran. That's the short and sweet of it. It would be, the veteran themselves, their spouse, their surviving spouse, their children, their dependents. Active military members, as long as they're a veteran and their families, National Guard and Reserve, their families. I think a big population that we serve that people kind of don't really track on is the professionals. We work with all of the professionals. And for example, in Ramsey County, we have really good working relationships with Human Services, Public Health, now the courts, because Ramsey County just implemented a veteran court track. And that is a partnership of the county attorney, the courts, corrections and probation, Veterans Services, remand. So all of those partners are together with the Fed as part of the veteran court track. And that's kind of how those veteran courts are constructed, is to bring all those partners together. Working with our partners is a huge part of the service model of the veteran service officers around the state. The partners, the two biggest being the VA and the state of Minnesota, are just two of the partners. We really work as effectively as possible with all of the partners, and that means understanding what they do, what they can provide, what their eligibility would dictate, just really trying to stay current with all of that. That's the reason that it really actually behooves you to consider the Veteran Service Officer as your first point of contact for a caller that has just the spectrum of questions. So what do we do? Well, we're available to assist with tasks. So I'll mention just a couple of the tasks, identifying potential benefits being the number one. So a lot of times the caller has maybe a specific question about a benefit, and sometimes it's a very general question. They just want to know, what can I be eligible for based on my military service? So we're prepared to answer the spectrum of the question, from the very specific to the very general. And we try and do our screenings in that way. We explain eligibility for state and federal programs, file paperwork, track progress of claims and applications, translate official correspondence, follow up with veterans after decisions. So we do actually do a case management model. We're not just filing paperwork and going, oh, you're on your own. Really, we are there for the long haul, because some of these processes, bureaucratic processes, everybody knows what I'm talking about, they drag on forever. We just hope that they conclude, in time to really matter for people. But I think the best case scenario is that they are working with a service officer, because we are going to actually be able to identify, okay, this step, this step, this step. And also, in my own case, I try and be as direct and forthright with people as I possibly can. I'm not going to lead you down the merry path thinking that you're going to be eligible for something, so that you're going to end up eventually calling the Jennifers of the world to say, I've just gotten the runaround and I don't understand what I can get. So I really do try and encourage people, if you're confused, if you're frustrated, if you have another question, call me back. Call me back and we'll talk about it. So we do stick with people, and it is an important aspect of the service, because these processes do go on. Yes?
Do you do most of your work over the phone, or do you have an office that veterans can come into to see?
We actually do have an office, and it's located in downtown St. Paul. As I mentioned, each of the offices is created with its own office model. Since we are a metro area county, we really have to have scale to the ability to respond. So we do a huge amount of business on the phone and by email. Thank goodness for email, because it's really made it possible to serve the exponential. One of Sarah's slides that she didn't go into today talks about the fact that the actual population of veterans is declining. Statistically, it's declining. The demand for services and programs and benefits has exploded exponentially. And that's partially demographic, and then it has to do with the drawdown around the world of the troops, in particular Iraq and Afghanistan. And then it has to do with the basic fact that we are just living longer. We are living longer, and so people are around a lot longer. I think it's kind of a mistaken notion that we only do service-connected disabilities, or we only help with home loans, or VA only does those things. The largest population we're serving right now is the Vietnam-era veterans. That's got to do with a demographic effect. The most intensive need is from the Korean and World War II era veterans. So it really has to do with the fact that they're living longer and at some point need some help to be able to sustain independent living. And that equals more money, the need for assisted living or skilled nursing. And we are there to cooperate and support and facilitate accessing benefits, making referrals, just helping people to navigate these systems and bureaucracies. So that's a lot of what we do. I was going to talk about, what VA does and what the state does, but I guess my one comment would be the state offers a lot of programming. And in this state in particular, they have a lot of heart for veterans. And so there's some really great programming out there that includes housing, dental optical, it includes financial counseling, it includes the Minnesota Vet Homes. They operate the vet homes, the state does. The Fed, for their part, big, huge bureaucracies, and it's benefits, the health care system, VHA, and the cemeteries. That's VA. That is what VA is. It's those three entities. And all of the eligibility for all of the programs in the VBA, in the healthcare, in the cemetery, all different. So even though you may be a veteran and you may logically qualify for services somewhere, figuring that out is really a challenge. And VA has done a really good job, and so has the state with their website. So I would encourage you to go out there and click around and explore. You're going to learn a lot that way. At least maybe feel a little bit more confidence about understanding those structures, because the structures are kind of a mystery, just a big bureaucratic thing out there kind of trying to make our lives miserable. So I think with that, probably we should allow enough time to have questions. Did you have concluding
Well,
remarks,
I do, but
Ellie?
let's see what questions we have. This is a great opportunity to ask anything you've got relating to vets, either legal or social service related, just general questions. What are you getting?
Yeah.
Sure. Just a general one. What, for both of your organizations, what do you find is the busiest time of the year for you guys?
Well, that's a really interesting question. It really is.
Is there a specific, is it during winter when, you have to work
It's
through
not
housing
during
issues, or-
winter, and I suspect that has to do with snowbirds.
Okay.
I really actually do. I know it sounds weird, but I think, and also that maybe families are focused on families, children in school and kids and all of that. Really, it goes in the summer and it starts and it just goes like that.
Okay.
And then it drops off somewhere in November. So I really, it's kind of a mystery to me, but that is a fact.
Well, and right when it drops off in November is when, there's a lot of family law issues around the holidays. Things tend to come up. I don't know what it is about holidays that create the breakdown of families, but it's something we've seen for years and years and years. We actually just did a clinic on Tuesday at the Minneapolis VA hospital, right? 3 inches of snow. We're in the auditorium, which is next to a hallway that's under construction. We thought no one could find us. 65 veterans still showed up. So it's lower than our normal of 80 or 85, but that was a mess on Tuesday. And that many people were able to come and make it to us and seek out the assistance was shocking. We were happy they were able to come and get the services, but certainly I was not expecting that number in January. So I would say my busy time is any time I hold a clinic, pretty much. Realized I misspoke earlier. I think I said 10% of veterans in Minnesota may experience homelessness in 1 year. It's 1%. I did the math in my head. Lawyers are not good at math. I should not attempt doing it in my head again.
But 11% of the total number of homeless is veterans in Minnesota.
Yep.
And that's really replicated around the country as well. I was going to give you a suggestion, Sarah.
Yes.
It would be really great if MACV had a calendar, a 1-year calendar that showed when the legal clinics on one page.
Would be.
Little definition at the top. Just doing a little self-promotion here.
See, I didn't quite cover this. So I started in 2011 in the fall, and it took me only a year to create a program that I can't manage. So I have just recently gotten an assistant, and the world become a brighter, happier place with more organization moving forward. So we will have calendars moving forward. In all honesty, last year I was planning the next clinic right after the previous one. So I didn't have a lot of ability to tell people when to expect the programs we're doing around the state. Since we have just a few more minutes, I'd like to briefly talk about Veterans Treatment Courts and the Veterans Court track in Ramsey County, because I think that's something, there's a lot of misinformation out there about Veterans Courts, and there's a lot of interest in it, for good reason. It's really it's a model that's based on the drug courts and the mental health courts. So like I said before, it's designed to provide supportive services to the veteran as they're going through the criminal justice process. One thing, probably the biggest misconception that I hear from veterans, is that they want to go to the Veterans Court because the judge will understand that they didn't do it. So we're all clear, You only get into the Veterans Court if you admit that you did it. It is not a way to avoid getting the conviction necessarily. It's not a way to have them understand why you did it. It's a probationary program. Almost every court in the country requires that you make some sort of plea of guilt. The Ramsey County Court is doing it in what I would suggest is the correct way, which is to say they're taking a pocket plea. So the prosecutor has a piece of paper that says the person admits guilt for the crime. They do not enter that into the record if the person successfully completes the court process. So we were looking at lowering the collateral consequences of the criminal behavior in the sense that they will not have that on their record. We can't get rid of the arrest, but we can get rid of that conviction, right? Some programs actually require they go on the record, plead guilty, get convicted, and then they get diverted into the Veterans Court process. So I think many people, when they hear Veterans Treatment Court, think, oh great, I'm a veteran, they'll understand that I didn't really do this or why I did it. That's not what it's about. If the person is not willing to take responsibility for their actions, or if they honestly didn't do it, right? I know one person who was charged with a domestic I was working with, he's like, well, I need to go to the Veterans Court. I'm like, but you didn't do it. Well, yeah, but they'll understand. And I'm like, no, because you have to say you did it to get in. And so one thing that's easily misunderstood is that it's not taking your veteran status into consideration to decide whether you're innocent or guilty. It's providing supportive services and a structured probation term. It takes longer and is harder work than going through the traditional court process.
It is.
It is not the easy way out, and
Not
far
everyone
from
is,
it.
yeah, not everyone is going to choose to do it. And it
Yep.
is, I think some of the point is it brings all of the, they call them stakeholders in other settings. It brings all of those individuals to the table. So you have remand, you have corrections, you have the courts, you have the county attorneys, suburban attorneys, the police is represented, and it's trying to identify what can we do to support this individual so that they can go on. But it's not a get out of jail free by any stretch, and Sarah is right. There's 3 tracks in most, and one of them is a pocket plea. So, law enforcement is on board, the county attorneys, the courts. It really takes everybody's cooperation. The Fed is heavily involved, so the Veteran Justice Outreach.
Yep, and so we've got them now in Ramsey County. They're just starting up on a track basis, so I believe they're going to serve 25 veterans in the first year.
That's right.
One of the things that I think is the most impressive about that program is that they're also providing the supportive information to every veteran they encounter. So while only 25 may get into the specialty program, everyone who they run into in the court system who's being prosecuted, who's a veteran, is going to be referred to
Right.
Maria's office, is going to get MACV's information. So they're not limiting the supportive services to people who are going through the program. They're making sure that everybody has those connections. Hennepin County was the first in Minnesota, the 5th district in southern Minnesota. So it's out of Mankato in Blue Earth County, but they're
Earth.
eventually going to actually be doing cases across the judicial district, which is most of southwest Minnesota. St. Cloud has just started a track. Washington County has one. They are blowing up right now. I believe they went from, the first one was in 2007 in upstate New York with Judge Russell in Buffalo, and there are now 174.
Around the nation.
Which, there's probably more. I checked like 2 days ago, so it's probably like 190 now. But they're exploding, and I think it's a great thing.
Okay, does anybody have any, I've got a couple closing comments, but anybody have any final questions for our speakers? Okay, just to tie some loose ends as we try and do at the end of our talks. Recall that when VLN came and spoke about what resources the Volunteer Lawyers Network in Minneapolis had to offer, one of their rules, or excuse me, one of their services is that they have a Spanish-speaking attorney referral service. And recall that our rule then at that point was automatic. Spanish-speaking caller come with legal need, refer them to VLN, and VLN will take care of them, or at least get them referred to somebody else, but who can speak Spanish and who can assist. Now we're seeing yet again another, what I'm going to call automatic referral. You get a vet or a family member of a veteran's household or family. I didn't say that very well, but you get what I mean. You get that as a caller who has a legal need, automatic referral to MACV, and fallback referral over to Ramsey County VSO or Hennepin County VSO as well, or the county in which they're located. And I did listen very carefully because I heard Sara say the phrase over-refer, all right? And this is very, very important for us because now, as a screening mechanism, You hear vet and legal, and already this should be on your radar, and this should be at the top of your list for making the referrals. So now we're just taking people right away out of the system. We're getting them from what may be misplaced or off-target referrals. We get them to Sara, and if Sara is not the right place for them to go, Sara will get them to the right place. Okay? Seamless, and that's why we do this training.
Do you think for the callers who call in and ask specifically for legal aid, and we try to tease out, what their legal situation is, do you think we should add an addition of, and is anyone in the household a veteran?
Absolutely.
Did anyone in the household serve in the military?
That's the
Okay.
question. Yes, and as your training material shows on the first important tip, we talk about that because, as Sara spoke at the beginning of her talk, some people are not going to consider themselves veterans because they didn't serve at a time of war, they didn't serve in war. They may just say, well, yeah, I was in the Army, but I'm not a veteran.
Right.
Okay, and so remember that important screening tool. But to go back, Jennifer, to your question, we get many callers who say, I want the number for legal aid. They're not even talking about what their legal need is, and they're not giving, and of course, you guys are doing a great job because you're asking, well, let's talk for a second about what that legal need is so that you can make better targeted referrals. So now they say, I want legal aid. One of the questions to ask is, did you serve your country? And if they did, certainly give them the number to legal aid, but tell them, here's a better place for you to start, and send them to MACV. Crucial, just absolutely crucial. It's a far more efficient process for us.
And even if they haven't registered for veterans benefits,
Doesn't matter.
just because they've served, you'll help them.
Does not matter. So, okay, the last thing I would just point out to any viewers of the video is that the written training materials that accompany this video are placed on the Call for Justice website under a drop-down button that says, believe it or not, training materials. And as are all the other training materials for the previous 16 training sessions that we have conducted. So without further ado, this ends our 17th training session. I'd like to express our appreciation for our speakers. Thank you very much.